Hello and welcome back. I am Clayton Pixton.
And I'm Susan Easton Black.
I'm coming to you from Kansas, where it's very cold right now. And Susan, you are in?
Pretty sunny Provo. I mean, we're still waiting for snow here. Hardly
Sunny,
seems
huh?
like winter.
Yeah, well, we're here to talk to you a little more about the history of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, focusing on kind of the early beginnings, time of Joseph Smith. And what are we talking about today, Susan?
Oh, today we're going to talk about blessings that were received by the early saints because of their faithfulness, righteousness, and then what happened to those that kind of wandered off and those that fought against the church. You know, what can you look forward to?
Yeah, and I had a preview, and it's a fascinating kind of way to look at it, and some very probably valuable lessons for us.
I think so for me, anyway.
Yeah, we talked last time about the Kirtland fall of the Safety Society and some of the results of that. So yeah, all right. Well, with no further ado, except for the song, of course, I will play "Choose the Right." I'm doing it on piano. I promise you can't see my hands, but I really am. And it goes something like this. Choose the right when a choice is placed before you. In the right, the Holy Spirit guides, and its light is forever shining o'er you. When in the right, your heart confides. Choose the right, choose the right. Let wisdom mark the way before. In its light, choose the right, and God will bless you evermore.
Thank you.
That was Choose the Right. What a great, great, great hymn. And it brings the spirit, so I hope it did for you. And that is where my contribution kind of pauses for now, and we turn it over to Susan. So please tell us about how blessings are predicated on righteousness and how we
Great.
learn that.
Okay, I think just reading the Book of Mormon, we come up with such phrases that appear so often. If you keep the commandments, you prosper in the land. And you get this if then. So I, the Lord, am bound when you do what I say. When you do not what I say, you have no promise. You get the if then. And so the question comes, well, what are the blessings then for the early saints that knew the prophet Joseph Smith? Did they also experience the if then thing, much like you see in the Nephite time? You see it also in the Old Testament, the New Testament. You know, if you do this, then this follows. I decided that I would, for tonight, look at some of the different people that knew the prophet Joseph Smith, from Almon W. Babbitt to Brigham Young to John F. Boynton to Parley Pratt to Heber C. Kimball. What happens in their lives when they kept the commandments? And it was obvious, they're the guy at church. And no matter what happens, they always seem to show up. They're the ones that are making covenants, keeping covenants. And with that, I'm taking just the men that appeared in the Doctrine and Covenants to keep it more simple for all of us so that you could do the same study I'm going to talk about. The first thing I noticed after writing literally about all of their lives, I think some of us are always curious as you read the Doctrine and Covenants. Did he go on a mission? Well, was he faithful all of his life? Did he serve in various priesthood callings? And at the end of his life, was he still serving? As a result, I could take the men mentioned in the Doctrine and Covenants and the women, and there's 130 or so, and I could divide them into 4 categories. And I don't know if they would like the categories I chose for them, but I found that some of them were always faithful. I mean, you just knew they would be at the church, at the temple, they'd be reading scriptures. And you'd say that was actually a small amount. And, I find that pretty interesting. And you'd say, what's the largest amount? And it would be active, inactive, active, kind of like the revolving door. They're on the friendship list. Their feelings are hurt. They're out. They forgot about something. They were hurt again. They're out. And so it's kind of in and out, in and out. And then I found that some of the people mentioned the Doctrine and Covenants. It was like they left the church, and no matter how many do-gooders stopped by and said, come on, we need you in church, no matter how many invitations they received, they never returned. And then the smallest group of all was those that left the church and they fought against it. I mean, they're actively fighting, whether it's usually through publications, but sometimes physically. And so we're going to pause and we're going to look at each of those 4 groups and try and determine what blessings they received. So we start first with the always faithful. Now, I actually wanted the always faithful. They had great health. They had multitudes of children. All their children were faithful. They were obedient. They were prosperous in the land. I wanted all the things that we think of, oh, is that a great life? But I didn't necessarily find that. In other words, I found sickness, like Heber C. Kimball is run over by a wagon, and you think, oh, surely a member of the First Presidency, stop, look, listen, you won't die that way. But I found that they experienced many problems through their lives. But okay, what were the blessings that they received? And the first was personal revelation. And I'm just going to do one story kind of on each one so you get the idea. Heber C. Kimball, Brigham Young always called him the prophet's prophet. He just seemed to know things in advance. Well, to show it, one time Heber C. Kimball was living in Salt Lake City. Obviously, it's after Joseph Smith had been martyred. And Heber had a young man that worked for him at what Heber called his estate, which was no more than a fence, a yard, and a house, right? But the young man one day came to President Kimball and said, I would like you to buy me a new pair of shoes. At which point Heber said to the young man, well, if you saved your wage, you'd have your privilege of purchasing for yourself your own pair of shoes. And the man thanked Heber for the advice. But at night, when the young man is home, he told the Lord that truly he respected Heber C. Kimball as a member of the First Presidency when Brigham Young was president, but he wanted the Lord to know that when it came to being an employer, that Heber was the meanest, stingiest employer he had ever had. Well, the next afternoon, as the young man now sauntered into work, Heber was waiting for him and had a new pair of black boots. The man was very surprised and thought that Heber was trying to show him an object lesson. In other words, I saved my money, therefore I have a new pair of boots. But instead, Heber said to the young man, these boots are for you. The young man was very taken back and indicated that just yesterday he had told him that he was to save his money so he could have us purchase his own shoes. At which point Heber said, oh no, my friend, these shoes are for you with the promise that you will never tell my God that I am the meanest, stingiest employer again that you have ever had. And so what I see on this, Clayton, is personal revelation. If you're always faithful, what do you get? In his case, it's an amazing pipeline to heaven. And, we're told in our time the need of personal revelation. And what can the always faithful expect? I think personal revelation is one. Well, what else can we learn? Another one to kind of drill the point. You got to be a teacher to know you want to drill in the ones. I'm going to do James E. Talmage. Believe it or not, Clayton, I'm actually tall compared to James E. Talmage. And he actually had a chair built on the red chairs in the tabernacle, kind of seat, so his head would be as high as the other brethren. But one day, James E. Talmage, a very famous scientist at the U of U, one of the brethren suggested that he marry. And James thanked him for the advice, and this is the one I got from math friends. Whether it's legit or not, I'm not sure, but it drills the point. And the man wouldn't let James off until he agreed to talk to the Lord about, should I marry? And as he's praying, the answer he received was yes. He then proceeds to tell the Lord he is a very busy man, but he does happen to have the next lunch hour available. And that his plan is to eat his lunch in the Pioneer Park there in Salt Lake City, and when his wife walks by, the Lord will merely point her out. And I don't know if it's between the tuna fish sandwich and the apple, the carrot, whatever it was, sure enough, she walks by. So bottom line, what did I consistently find with those who are always faithful? They seem to have a tie-in with the Lord. They seem to have, this personal revelation that was sonated in their lives and their lives of their loved ones. What else I found about these men was they had confidence. And, you ever had someone say, well, I'd like you to give a talk, and you're like, who, me? And, some turning it down, and I'm going, oh, no. What I found was consistent confidence. One example, stories on each, Brigham Young. As Brigham Young got close to his death, he called in his Relief Society president, Eliza R. Snow, and he said, measure me for my coffin. And so she did, and he said he wanted to be buried in pine from Pine Valley, Utah. He thought it was the best wood in the whole, valleys that he had settled. And then he said to Eliza that he wanted to be buried in pink Relief Society silk. Now, what man chooses pink? For the lining of his coffin. But
a confident one, I guess.
I mean, you'd have to be pretty confident for that. And then showing his additional confidence, he said to Eliza, now, when I die, I want my head turned to the side. And she was surprised because you realize anybody we've seen in death, laid out in a coffin, their face is forward. It's like, catch me, Lord, I'm coming. But Brigham said he wanted his head turned to the side. And when Eliza asked him, his comment was, he said, I'm hoping with my head to the side that the Lord won't recognize me so quick and that I will have a time to rest. He said, because I've never had it in this life. And so what you get is you get a man like Brigham Young who comes to Kirtland, we talked about, with no shoes. And yet you'd say, does he have confidence? He's brimming with confidence, but it's like Christ's confidence. And so you get that. What else could you expect if you're always faithful? I turn to John Taylor for this story. We know that John Taylor, a member of the 12, that when Joseph Smith was martyred, that John Taylor was there in the room. He had 4 bullets enter his body, one in his leg, his hip, and one in a wrist and then a hand. And John Taylor convalesces and takes some time convalescing, and actually even in later years couldn't walk without the use of a cane. But when John Taylor is in this condition in the winter of 1846, a wagon's been packed for him. He's got his wife, he's got his children. He puts it on a skiff to cross the mighty Mississippi. And as he does so, everything seems to have been weighted wrong, and suddenly all his possessions go into the river. And by the time John gets over on the Iowa side, the only thing he has is a blanket to throw up in a tree to protect his wife and children. At this point, Brigham Young now comes to him and says, John, I'd like to call you on a mission. Well, across the Mississippi, he lived in a brick house. Could have left his wife in, not necessarily luxury, but at least comfort. And John said, where am I being called? And he says, well, you're being called to England. And John said, how soon do I need to leave? And Brigham said, tomorrow morning will be fine. And to the credit of John, he said yes. And listening to the invitation to serve a mission was Heber C. Kimball. He prayed to the Lord and he asked, would it ever be made up to John Taylor, his ultimate sacrifice at this point. And Heber said he received a revelation. He went to John and he said, John, I've just received a revelation for you. And John said, Heber, one a night is all I need. And he said, keep yours. I just heard from Brigham. And Heber said, no. He goes, you're going to like this. He said, I prayed to the Lord. I heard your willingness, your sacrifice, to serve this mission. Cain, he's got, these wounds. And Heber said, I received a revelation that one day when we are in Zion, that you will yet have the most beautiful house in all of Zion. And John said, take that back. He goes, I don't like that one. Well, he serves his mission. He's, when he eventually becomes president of the church, a very well-to-do family didn't know what to do with their house, and so they gave it to the church. Now, the church at that time, they knew what to do with tithing barns and, that kind of thing, but they had never been given a house before. So John Taylor brought it up in conference. We've got a house. I don't know what to do with it. It's this beautiful house up by the Capitol. And someone raised their hand and said, well, there's only one person I know worthy enough to live in a house like that, and it's you, President Taylor. And John said, I don't want it. And the congregation voted that John would live in that house. And so if you wanted to visit a wife, children, you came to the front door. If you wanted to visit John Taylor, you had to come to the back door through the kitchen. He was always too embarrassed. So notice now what we've learned about those that were faithful, that we could go in Joseph's time period. They were confident. They received personal revelations. They just kept getting more and more responsibilities. One other thing that I found that was so phenomenal is that they developed literally lifelong friendships through Christ-like service. And, Clayton, you've probably been in, zillion bishoprics, high councils, whatever you've been doing, the scouting way back when. And, you make these friendships through serving others that are just hard to replicate in other parts of society. Well, okay. We now turn to, what if you're like Orson Hyde? A man that's active, he's inactive, he's active. He's revolving door. Okay, what happens to this guy? Well, we know that Orson Hyde, I've always thought he was one of the most, if not the most brilliant of the early saints that joined the church. He memorized the entire Bible, or so he claimed. He claimed you could tell him one verse and he would tell you the verse before and after. And I'm like, oh my gosh, he would have been an honor student for sure. And he could do that in English, in Hebrew, and in German. And you'd say, are you kidding me? You could tell him a verse. He could tell you the verse before and after, and that's Orson Hyde. But coming home from one of his missions in England, he's ill. It's Far West time. And suddenly he's listening to Thomas B. Marsh, who's falling apart in the church. And Thomas convinced him to sign an affidavit claiming that Joseph Smith is like a modern Mohammed and that he's, going to take over basically the state of Missouri. And at which point Orson Hyde is out. I guess what I like about the story, not much, right? But he had on his mission as a companion Heber C. Kimball. And Heber C. Kimball, rather than gossiping about Orson Hyde, went after to find him and to bring him back. And, we've just got to really hope that we've had a companion, a friend out there in our church service that will put his arms around us and bring us back. And Orson Hyde came back. And what was the impact once he's back? Well, he's the man that's called to dedicate Jerusalem. He travels over to Europe. He's sick for a while in Germany, a couple of months. He picks up the German language while ill. And then he goes to Israel, what we call Israel today. He picks up Hebrew and dedicates that land for the return of the Jews. Now, the impact happens to him later in life. In 1875, Orson Hyde, by this point, is president of the Quorum of the 12. And Brigham Young is the president of the church. And Brigham Young calls in Orson Hyde and says to Orson, I've been thinking about the year 1837-38. Remember we talked about last time Kirtland Safety Society and, just the repercussions, spin-offs. And Orson said, I've repented. And Brigham says, I know that, but during the months you were out, we put in a man to take your place. And therefore, Orson, you need to step down. And the man that was put, had served then longer in faithfulness. So Orson was in the 12, lost his membership, put back in the 12 in his original spot, but the man who had served longer in faithfulness should be president of the 12. So John Taylor becomes the president of the 12 in 1875, and when Brigham Young dies in 1877, what you get is longevity of faithfulness in the Quorum of the 12 determined who became the president.
Or it could have been Orson Hyde.
Or it would have been Orson Hyde, who served 20 plus years in that position as president. What I like is, although he moved his position, he always stayed faithful. So he had that momentary in-out. Okay, the next one to look at, Thomas B. Marsh. Boy, Thomas B. Marsh, what an interesting man. This man, he survives the Kirtland Safety Society, but he gets out there in the far west area, and he has land right next to George Washington Harris. And Thomas's wife becomes best friend with the wife of George Washington Harris, and they conclude that they will share milking, and then they will share the strippings from the cream so both women can make better cheese. So you realize, Clayton, it's a cholesterol story. It starts bad, ends bad. But finally, Thomas's wife is concluding that, the crazy thing, my friend next door, she's cheating me. At which point, Thomas becomes very angry. He takes it to what was then called the bishop's court. The bishop looks into the matter. As far as he could tell, hey, Thomas, if anybody's in the wrong, I think you better look at your wife. And Thomas is angry. He takes it to the High Council Court, of which George Washington Harris is a member, and he will not excuse himself. In other words, two neighbors are now angry. And the stake president, High Council, make the decision, hey, Thomas, in other words, if anybody's messed up, I think you should look at your wife. Thomas now takes it to the court of the first presidency. And Joseph looks into the matter, and his conclusion is, Thomas, I'm going to support all those decisions behind. Well, what does Thomas do as a result? He then issues that, sends a letter to Lilburn W. Boggs. Thomas doesn't pull the trigger on the extermination order, but boy, he's close. And Boggs goes, what do? I have all these problems, and now I've got one of Joseph's closest, president of the 12. I'm issuing an extermination order. Well, Thomas is out of the church, and Thomas is out for 18 years. Notice the difference in Orson Hyde, right? Mm-hmm. Orson Hyde is a quick in and out, and then does amazing service over in Israel. For Thomas B. Marsh, he's 18 years out. I decided I would follow his life during those 18 years, and he tries to support himself as a school teacher. Now, I can speak to the fallacy of that.
Because you were a school teacher for years, right?
For years. But Thomas, his favorite subject to teach was biblical geography. And for a man that's never been over there, you can imagine it was not exactly standing room only. And Thomas suffers from poverty. He also suffers from poor health. At one point, he's shaking so bad that others then have to help dress him, care for basic needs.
His marriage fails as well, right?
Yeah, his marriage fails. I mean, just everything goes wrong for him. And finally, 18 years later, he concludes, I may have made a mistake. And sometimes takes us a while to come to that decision, right? Well, he works his way to Council Bluffs, And he actually stops at the home of George Washington Harris. He wants to see George's wife and apologize. He thinks that his wife had been in the wrong now. And George, his wife had died. He takes in Thomas B. Marsh. He cares for them. Thomas is rebaptized out there in the Missouri River, and then Thomas heads to Salt Lake City. And people began to question, was his baptism any good? I mean, after all, he was the one so involved in what ultimately became the extermination order with that letter and all. Well, at a meeting and then the old tabernacle, Brigham Young has Thomas come and sit on the stand. And Brigham Young's topic is, I want to know, where are those in the audience that struggle because of the extermination order in Missouri? And many now stand. And then Brigham says, I want you to know who's sitting next to me. It's Thomas B. Marsh. Well, we were much more vocal back then in conferences. People had a lot to say. They really disliked this man. And Thomas came to the stand, and he apologized. I like his comment. He said that, he tried to explain his shaking kind of palsy. And he said, the Lord loved me too much to let me go without a good shaking. And after his apology, he was then welcomed 100% back into the church. But it's so interesting. I found that Thomas, at the end of his life, ends up on the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints on their records as being a high priest in their church. He moved out to Ogden. So, his story, it's a message for all of us that sometimes, I don't know, the little things get you. The big ones we can live through, right?
Try not to take your neighbor to court if you can prevent it.
Yeah.
If you can go to him personally, right?
Yeah, go to him personally, solve it early, nip it. Okay, well, next. We talked about last time Parley P. Pratt, Kirtland Safety Society. I think it's fresh on our mind, where in his mind these were darkest days. And then we know he comes back, does wonderful things. We also know when we look at this, as we look at the next, we know that we get Oliver Cowdery. When he comes back in Council Bluffs after, many years out, he describes these were days never to be forgotten as he talks about being able to be the scribe to the Book of Mormon. And then we turn to Martin Harris. Martin Harris is out, 30 plus years. And his comment when he sees the Salt Lake Temple underway in the tabernacle, his comment was, who would have guessed the Book of Mormon has done all these things? But notice he's out so long. He still remembers, but he didn't get to be a part of it. So the question is, well, what are the blessings that they missed?
Well, and Parley was also reordered in the quorum, right?
Right. Parley is reordered too, where Wilford Woodruff moves forward. Great comment. So you'd say, what are the blessings missed? Well, confidence. You can pick that up. Martin really struggles. You'd say personal revelation, knowing what you need to do at the time. You also get just the friendship, being able to be with everybody, the, privilege of taking the sacrament, suffering with the saints or experiencing the joys with the saints. So it basically comes down to choice. I really like to, choose the right. It's maybe simpler to do than we might think, but blessings are missed. Okay, we now look at what happens to those that never return. John Boynton is my favorite to talk about in this way. John Boynton was the only member of the Quorum of the 12 to be a college graduate. And he actually was named into the Quorum of the 12 as a bachelor. So all you bachelors out there, hold out. You never know. But anyway, he's ultimately, does marry. And he's very faithful in the Quorum of the 12 until the Kirtland Safety Society. He didn't have much money, but he was one of the principals in the organization of the Kirtland Safety Society, and he had dreams. You know how there's my Mercedes, there's a Humvee, there's my 17-car garage. I mean, he just had these huge dreams. And when the Kirtland Safety Society collapsed, and the average investor is getting that 12.5 cents on a dollar, Boynton joins with Warren Parrish and takes over that Kirtland Temple. And at one point, he comes in with a whip and literally whipping out Joseph Smith, Senior, Brigham Young, and you'd go, wow, Boynton, how are you? At one point, he concluded, religion doesn't bring out the best in me. Look what happened to me. I'm a college graduate, I'm a scientist, and suddenly, I'm acting berserk, over a lost dream. And so Boynton now leaves the church and he never returns. I think of the old Kingston Trio song, oh, he'll never return, no, he'll never return. His fate is still unlearned. But in the case of Boynton, he goes back to New York and he becomes a famous inventor. In his time period next to Brigham Young, John Boynton's name was in neon lights. And he invented many, many wonderful things. You'd say he invented tar roofs. He invented a levee system going out to San Francisco where you could pick up large objects from the bottom of the ocean, like boats that had sunk. He actually was the inventor of the fire extinguisher. So all of us that have it in kitchens or in our cars, he's the inventor of the torpedo, which in many respects still protects our shorelines. Well, the list of his inventions just go on and on. I mean, he's so creative. At one point, when he married a second time, he married a woman in a hot air balloon flying over New York City. I think I would have really liked to be his friend. I would see him as creative, fun. He always has a new idea. Well, at one point, Brigham Young began to search out his old friends. And he sent word to John F. Boynton to come to Salt Lake City and with the idea to return. And Boynton will accept his invitation, not with the idea he wants to join any kind of religion again, but what he wants to do is he wants to show his old friends what he became after he left religion. Look at me. And he would take his scientific experiments on the road. Well, he comes to Salt Lake. He actually stays with Brigham Young in the Beehive House. And for 3 weeks, you could come to Temple Square and you could watch my ancestors laboriously building on the temple, with cranes trying to lift up those big granite stones. Or you could listen to lectures by John F. Boynton. And Brigham had many that had been baptized by Boynton, that had received priesthood ordinations by Boynton, that had received priesthood blessings, come to Temple Square to talk to him, to tell him that, hey, stay, look what I've become. I now live in wherever they lived. And Boynton wasn't moved. And finally, at the end, Brigham Young said, we need you to stay. In other words, there aren't many people like him, what he could do for our small little settlements. And Boynton says no, he was not going to stay there. He was going back to New York, and that he had so many more things he wanted to invent. I mean, he's got 60 some odd patents to his name. And Brigham said, I promise you, if you go back to die. And Boynton thought that was really funny till he gets back to Syracuse and he's got a pain. Local doctor is called in. Local doctor says, I think it's gallbladder. Boynton says, no, I think it's appendix. And Boynton actually rewrites his will so that if he is right about the cause of his death, that the town will drum out of town his doctor, which drum means you shave the head and you walk behind him with drums, so he's forced to leave. And for Boynton, sure enough, he was right. He dies from appendicitis. He also indicates he wants his body to go in and to do, so you can see really cause of death.
Biopsy or something.
Yeah,
whatever.
some kind of, And he ultimately, before his death, he organized one of the first genealogical society at Boynton's in his family, and actually sent to his best friend in the quorum, Orson Pratt, some names so that temple work could be done for his family. But you look at him and you go, did he return? And I go, nope, he never did return. Did he make amazing contributions? I go, oh, absolutely. I mean, we're still blessed, just a fire extinguisher and torpedo alone. So we're blessed, but you'd say, well, no, he just never returned. Well, who else never returned? We say, David Whitmer. Remember, all these people going, come on, David, come on, come back. They never returned. Well, what do I think of these people? And you'd say, blessings are mixed. What did they miss by never returning? Well, they never got to receive their endowments. They themselves personally were never sealed to their families, right? You'd say they missed out on the fellowship of the saints. In both their cases, they would have lived long enough to have helped in the settlement of the Intermountain West. They missed out that. But it was kind of like, in my mind, they had a pearl of great price. And despite wonderful accomplishments by both men, it was like, they didn't value it. Okay?
I notice you haven't mentioned, you're not talking about kind of the final, particularly on the first two groups and the ones who left and came back. It doesn't seem like you're commenting on their final judgment or whatever.
Yeah,
you're just
I don't
about
know how the Lord will judge them. I hope mercifully, because that's what I'm hoping for. But it's just what they missed out in this life is the only thing I think I could really talk about. In other words, eternity, so many mysteries.
Yeah.
But we all got to be so grateful for the Savior, Yeah.
Yep.
So the next group, those that fight against the church, one of my favorite men to talk about is this guy. He was a school teacher, William McLellin, in 5 different states, and he viewed that as making him smart. Now, as a school teacher, I'm not quite sure that makes you incredibly smart, but he thought he was smart. In fact, at one point,
That's a
Joseph...
problem. Always a problem.
Always a problem. And at one point, Joseph wanted all the members of the Quorum of the 12 to be able to read the revelations he wanted printed in the Doctrine and Covenants, and then to sign their names saying they knew they were revelations from God. And William McLellin, he was the one that said, hey, I won't sign this. And the reason he won't sign this, he goes, I can write better revelations than you claim you received from God. He's telling Joseph this. And in the Doctrine and Covenants, the Lord challenges William McLellin to a revelatory duel. In other words, go for it. You write better revelations. And when McLellin couldn't do this, he concluded, they must be revelations from God, because after all, I can't write better than Joseph shown me. Well, for McLellin, he's one of those, like John F. Boynton, who was a principal in the Kirtland Safety Society, and he had big hopes of, he had the dreams of what he was going to do with all this additional funds. And when it didn't happen, the difference between the two men, they both are irritated, right? But the difference between the two is...
You're talking about William McLellin and who else?
And John Boynton.
Boynton.
So they both lost their dream. But in the case of William McLellin, he now goes looking for Joseph. And he finds Joseph then in Richmond jail. And he says to the jailer, I want the privilege of going in and beating up one of your prisoners. At which point the jailer says, great sport. Which one? And they're all, they've got a chain, going through their, shackles. And but McLellin wants the chains kept on. And McLellin says he wants to fight Joseph. But the crazy thing, it's the night after Joseph Smith had the experience where he rebuked the guards and said, "Silence, you fiends of the infernal pit, or you or I will die this instant." And suddenly you get McLellin showing up the next day. I mean, timing is everything. And he shows up the next day, and the jailer says, no, you fight that man. It's a fair fight. And McLellin comes back with a club and says, well, okay, you can take off his chains, but you can't let him take the club from me. And the jailer says, no, I'm telling you, fair fight with that man. In other words, I stayed up all night where, we were quaking all night. We're not going to do this. Well, McLellin, rather than then going after Joseph anymore, he goes to Joseph's home where Emma is she's got 4 children. And, oldest Julia, is about 7, and then Joseph Smith III and, a toddler and baby in arms. And McLellin breaks into the house and steals then some of their property. So you look and you go, oh my gosh, he's such a jerk. So then my question was, well, what happened to this man? Sometimes you fight against the church, but you can never leave it alone. I mean, he tries to organize his own church, based on the Book of Mormon. I mean, he tries all these things. But the bottom line is, how does he die? And the answer is he dies drowning. And anyway, I find this pretty consistent. Another fight against the church was Lyman Johnson. He's, up there, I think it's Lake Michigan, one of those lakes, and he's on a toboggan, and it just goes into the lake where the ice breaks, and he also dies by drowning. So I think the message is, if you're a member of the 12, don't take baths, no swimming pools, think showers, but, pretty scary there. So that's McLellin. Well, who's another that fights against the church? William Law. We're going to learn about Joseph Smith and Nauvoo, and the Nauvoo expositor. William Law had been a counselor to the prophet Joseph in the first presidency. He fights against Joseph. By the way, he doesn't die by drowning. Okay, another one that fights against Joseph is Almon W. Babbitt. This man, I like to tell his story. He's mentioned in section 124, and he's told, beware of the golden calf. In other words, beware of money, And Almon W. Babbitt, when he saw the revelation, he said to Joseph, take it out. I don't want to be mentioned in there with beware of the golden calf. And Joseph said, right. No. Well, Babbitt had been the stake president in Kirtland. So you'd say, wow, he's held a very important position. And the story I like is that it's in June of 1844, and he's now a branch president out in a little town called Ramus, Illinois. And at this point, Joseph Smith, Hiram are in Carthage jail. And visiting Joseph on June 26th, the day before the martyrdom, is Joseph's uncle, John Smith. And Joseph says to John Smith, when he says, what can I do for you? Joseph says, go get me Almon W. Babbitt, who's an attorney by trade, and actually supposed to be a very good one. And Joseph says, tell Babbitt I need him to be my counsel, to be my attorney when my case and Hiram's case comes up in a court of law. So Uncle John Smith then goes to the nearby town of Ramus, and he finds Almon W. Babbitt, and he says to Babbitt, have you heard that Joseph and Hiram are in Carthage jail? And Babbitt says, yes, I know. And Uncle John says, oh, good. He said, I've been sent by them to tell you that they need you to defend them in the court of law when their case comes up. And Babbitt's comment was, oh, Uncle John, you're too late. I've already been hired by the other side. And you look and you go, oh, wow, Babbitt. So how did he die? Both accounts say he's wearing red corduroy pants, which possibly suggests a total fashion faux pas. But if it was more, one account says he's killed by Indians. Another account says Orrin Porter Rockwell went east and got his man. So I don't know, but the message is, you fight against the Lord's prophet, don't do that one. Of the 4 choices, that's not the good one.
Bad idea.
Well, okay. So what have we learned tonight? For me, I've learned I, the Lord, am bound when you do what I say. When you don't do what I say, you don't have that promise. And I need the protection of the covenants. I need the ability to say yes, the confidence to do so, the personal revelation to help with myself, my family. I mean, the list goes on and on. Those are kind of thoughts I've picked up from tonight. What about you, Clayton?
I'm thinking about that. I mean, I just can't imagine where I'd be. I mean, if I ever, were to leave, or I just hate to think what would happen if I were turned to the wrong side, or if I lost the spirit and became angry or something. I mean, it would be a disaster. I'm sure it would be a disaster. So
real unhappiness. So I guess the bottom line is we kind of look at the end. We're saying, here's your choice. What have I learned from the early saints? No doubt someone will look at our generation like I've looked at the generation of Joseph, and they'll find, maybe they'll come up with different categories and subcategories, and you can get totally carried away. But the always faithful, hard to do, in our society. I remember that it wasn't like it was huge few, but the active, inactive, active, that was by far the biggest category I found, even among those in the Doctrine and Covenants. I never returned the smallest were those that fought against the church. I think, stand in holy places, remember who you are. We seem to be coming up with a similar theme, said in so many different ways in what we've been doing, but as for me and my house, choose the Lord kind of thing.
Yeah, it makes me think of, modern times a bit, and I think we all know people, I guess the longer we are alive and are in the church and stuff, to the people who, do all of these, all these paths. I wonder if the proportions are kind of the same, or seems like they probably might be.
Yeah, portions could be the same. Well, I'd love to hear you sing again. It's always a treat.
Okay. Well, here we go. This is, we'll do verse 2. There's, all 3 of these verses are amazing. Choose the right, let no spirit of digression overcome you in the evil hour. There's the right and the wrong to every question. Be safe through inspiration's power. Choose the right, choose the right. Let wisdom mark the way before. In its light, choose the right, and God will bless you evermore. That's so good.
Wonderful.
I just want to keep singing, but we'll yeah. There's a CD of hymn arrangements by myself and a couple siblings that you can check out. We've mentioned it before. It's called Hymns Anew. And Susan, tell us about a book of yours that our listeners might be interested in.
Well, I think one of the books they'd probably be interested in is the book Joseph Smith, Impressions of a Prophet. And it takes Joseph's life from beginning to end, but illustrating it with just artistic images, sketches, is an amazing artist called Liz Lemon Swindle, who's the official artist for The Chosen. And she's got these paintings of Joseph Smith that I think each one is just a masterpiece. And I've enjoyed very much working with her. She's just a splendid person. And same with you, Clayton. And we hope the combination of listening to what we're talking about, the music, and as well as seeing the art will be something that you'd all like to have in your home.
Okay, so that's Joseph Smith, Impressions of a Prophet. Liz Lemon Swindle, is your name on it? Probably.
Yes.
Yes, it is. Okay, well, thanks, guys. We hope you've benefited today, and we would love to see you next time when we will be talking about what, Susan?
Well, I think we're about to move on to Missouri. Do you say it Missouri back there? If you really know what you're talking about?
I don't know if Kansans say that. I live in I'm not from Kansas originally, but there are people who say Missouri. But I don't know if that's an older thing, but some people for sure do. My wife doesn't. She's right from here, but
okay.
But if you're from Kansas, Kansas is a little better than Missouri. If you're from Missouri, you're definitely superior to Kansas. I think is how it goes. But it's like anything
we'll have
else.
Fun. I think we're gonna actually jump back in time and learn something about Jackson County and kind of pull everything up so we finally get Joseph Smith in Far West.
Awesome. Okay, guys, we'll see you next time.
Okay, goodbye.
Choose the right, there is peace in righteous doing. Choose the right, there's safety for the soul. Choose the right in all labors you're pursuing. Let God and heaven be your goal. Choose the right, choose the right. Let wisdom mark the way before. In its light, choose the right, and God will bless you ever.